So here's my question. If when I wake up in the morning we discover that Donald Trump is the president, are we going to get some apologies from those people that called those charismatic prophets false prophets?
That was Daniel Kolenda, and he's who we're looking at today. Hey everybody, Sean here, and welcome to Revealing Truth. Daniel Kolenda defending the false Trump prophets is what we're looking at today, so let's jump right in.
You know, if you've followed me for any length of time, you know that I'm not a political commentator. But today I'm going to make an exception because I want to talk about one particular aspect of this election that is particularly fascinating and interesting to me, the Trump prophecies. And I'm doing this because I want to use this as a springboard for a conversation about prophecy more generally and how it works.
And he's gonna speak some truth, but unfortunately, it's to defend some of the most notorious false Trump prophets there are. So before we hear what he has to say, let's look at the biblical purpose of prophecy in the New Testament. We're told that one who prophesies strengthens others, encourages them, and comforts them. Even if these phony Trump prophets were right, how would telling us that Trump was going to serve a second term strengthen, encourage, or comfort us? It wouldn't. You're going to tell us that God is telling all these different people that Donald Trump would serve a second term? Like, seriously? Why is that so important? And why would God be only telling people that have sketchy ministries and teach unbiblical things? Anyhow, let's hear what Daniel has to say.
Just so you know, this episode is really not about politics. I've got something different in mind. And if you follow my Instagram account, you might have an idea of what I'm going to say because, in fact, let me just play this for you. I posted this video on November 5th, which was the day of the 2024 election. And it was probably around noon in America on the East Coast. And I was in Nigeria watching all of this unfold from a distance. Just watch.
So I've got an election question for you. I'm in Abuja, Nigeria right now, watching the elections taking place in the U.S. We're about 6 hours ahead. So I'm about to go to sleep, and when I wake up in the morning, we will probably know who the next president of the United States is. So here's my question. The last time around, there were a bunch of prophets that predicted that Trump was going to have a second term. When that didn't happen, there were critics who openly, publicly called them false prophets and demanded that they repent. But here's the thing. As far as I'm aware, most of them, if not all of them, predicted not that Trump would have a second consecutive term, but just a second term, which means that if he wins now, they would have accurately predicted one of the most unlikely and stunning political upsets in American history. So here's my question. If when I wake up in the morning we discover that Donald Trump is the president, are we going to get some apologies from those people that called those charismatic prophets false prophets? Now that would be an October surprise.
And so again, my question is this. What do the critics do with the fact that Trump has won now, given the fact that so many charismatics prophesied that he would win, and many even predicted that he would win twice, and he did?
Well, I'm a critic, so here's what I'll say. Number one, it was more like a guess that had a 50% chance of coming true. And number two, like I said before, this so-called prophecy doesn't strengthen, encourage, or comfort anyone. Maybe it was a bit encouraging after the nightmare of Biden's run in office, but then again, they made that prophecy before Biden took power, so that doesn't count. He makes this point.
Now, if you've been watching this podcast, you know that I just finished a series not too long ago on cessationism. And I spent probably 13 or 14 hours refuting it biblically and logically and historically. And one of the things that I did in that series was to respond to this film where cessationists had made many arguments, but one of their main arguments that prophecy has ceased was based on the claim that all modern prophecy is false. And their exhibit A for that was the Trump prophecies. Let me show you just a little bit of what I'm talking about.
The problem with the charismatic movement today is that they don't have a single prophet who has been 100% accurate.
And he's right. And please keep in mind that I'm a continuationist like Daniel, but by God's grace can see through the shenanigans going on in the NAR movement.
Many of the modern day prophets made a lot of news with their presidential prophecies. Their prophecies of who would win the 2020 United States presidential election. Of course, all of them, 100% of them, prophesied that Donald Trump would win re-election in November of 2020, and he would serve a second consecutive term in the White House.
Okay, hold on. Listen to what he just said. All of them, 100% of them prophesied that Donald Trump would be reelected in November of 2020 and that he would serve a second consecutive term in the White House.
While it's true these Trump prophets did not literally say that, it was obvious that's what they meant. And if you watch the full 39-minute video, he goes into great length to prove that because Trump is now in power, that they are legit prophets of God. Using examples with Jeremiah Johnson, Robin Bullock, and Chris Valaton. You know, Chris Valaton, the guy who said Jesus walked into his bathroom. These are the people Daniel Kolenda is defending. Once again, he's correct that most of these people didn't say Trump would serve a second consecutive term, but that's obviously what they meant. Otherwise, I guess God was just being kind of vague with that quote-unquote prophecy.
Do you think, like I said in that earlier video, that there will be any kind of apology or even acknowledgement from the critics that they were actually wrong? Now, I know that some of you are probably saying, well, they did prophesy falsely because they all thought that Trump would win in 2020, and he didn't. And even some of the very guys that you saw in that video later apologized for getting it wrong. So maybe even if they didn't explicitly say that it was going to be a second consecutive term, maybe that's what they meant.
And that's exactly how I and many others feel, and why I, for one, won't be apologizing. But here's how he's going to explain it.
Maybe that's what they meant. And maybe in a moment of honest reflection after that second attempt that was failed, maybe they realized that there was the presumption or flesh or their own soulish desires mixed into those prophetic words. That can happen, and it does happen sometimes.
Where does it say that can happen in the Bible? The prophets of the Bible spoke accurately all the time. Prophecy in the Bible didn't rely on the prophet hearing clearly enough. It was God making sure they heard him loud and clear so that there would be no error in speaking on his behalf. But he continues.
So if that's the case, they were right to apologize as they did. On the other hand, maybe they really truly felt that they'd heard from the Lord and they understand what they heard to mean one thing. And then when it turned out that their understanding was incorrect, they apologized. But now, with a few more years of hindsight, we realize that they were right after all. They just didn't see the full picture at the time.
All he's doing is making excuses to justify false prophecy. Why is he trying so hard to justify false prophets that have ministries that are full of false teachings? These are the same liars that charge you money and tell you that you can learn prophecy.
You know, when people have no experience with something, I find they very often have naive notions about how it works or how it should work. And that's definitely the case with prophecy. A lot of people, especially the cessationist types, seem to imagine that prophecy is just like, you know, when Marty McFly takes the sports almanac back to 1955 and Back to the Future. They think it's just God telling you everything that's going to happen ahead of time, and now you know the future with perfect clarity.
But we don't have to have experience with prophecy to know that God's prophets never got it wrong, and that it's not something that you can pay money to learn in a bogus school of prophecy.
You know, I actually had a conversation with one of the guys that was showed in that video that was accused of being a false prophet for saying that Trump was going to win a second term. I talked to him on the phone, and I asked him his side of the story, what actually happened, and what he told me was very interesting. And when you hear this, I think it will make a lot of sense to you if you're not biased. He said that in 2020, he had a dream, or maybe it was a series of dreams, where he saw three distinct things take place. First, the Los Angeles Dodgers would win the World Series. Second, he saw Amy Coney Barrett being confirmed as a Supreme Court judge. And then he saw Donald Trump being reelected.
Once again, who cares? How was anyone strengthened, encouraged, or comforted by hearing about the Dodgers winning or that lady being confirmed as a Supreme Court judge? Seriously, with God there are no coincidences, but in regular life there are. And sometimes dreams are just dreams. If that was me, I'd think, that's That's funny. I had a dream about that the other night. I wouldn't suddenly think I was a prophet of God. Those things had nothing to do with God.
So he has these dreams, and then two of those events literally come to pass. The Dodgers won, and Amy Coney Barrett was confirmed. So he felt that it was a confirmation that the dream or the dreams he had were from the Lord. He shared that publicly, and he said that he believed that Trump would be reelected. Now, look, just try to be objective and unbiased here for a second. Let's just say, even if it's just for the sake of argument, let's just give that guy the benefit of the doubt. Let's say it happened exactly like he said it did. Imagine that happened to you. Imagine you have three dreams and you see three things happen that are all pretty unlikely, and then two of the things that you saw come to pass. Wouldn't you think, well, maybe there's something going on here? Maybe that third thing that I dreamt is going to come to pass too. And then let's say that you shared that publicly, and then it didn't happen the way that you assumed it would. But then 4 years later, it actually does happen in an even more dramatic and unlikely way. Wouldn't you think, well, that's amazing. God showed me that that was going to happen several years ago.
No, I wouldn't think that, because none of those things had anything to do with God. They were all just worldly events. And once again, nobody benefited from somebody predicting those events would happen. As mentioned in other videos, even fortune tellers get it right at times, like with the slave girl in the book of Acts, but they're definitely not hearing from God. We're only halfway through this video, but he just keeps on giving examples of why those Trump prophets were right. The Trump prophets he's defending, and there's a lot of them, all have playlists on this channel exposing their false teachings. And once again, predicting that Trump would be president does no godly good for anyone except the so-called prophet. It just makes them seem like some special person with a unique connection to God. And think about it. Where in the Bible did we ever read that God gave the same prophecy to many, many people? We don't. What I like about Daniel Kolenda is that he's a continuationist like myself and believes that God still gives his gifts to all believers. What I don't like, and can't even understand, is how he defends people that have done such harm to the body of Christ with their false teachings. Anyhow, we're going to leave it here for today, but as always, leave your thoughts below, and until next time, take care and God bless.